Hi, I'm Gina Sauer, and I'm back with another installment in my series where we take physical and vocal tips and techniques used by professional actors and apply them to improve our public speaking skills in the business world. Today, we'll be talking about gestures. Specifically, I'll be talking about 3 different types of gestures that you can try to incorporate the next time you're doing a presentation, and at the end, I'll be offering a couple bonus tips specifically for virtual presentations. The funny thing about gestures is that just like breathing, we do them all day long, every day when we're speaking, very naturally, but as soon as we feel like we have an audience and someone's watching us, we become very self-conscious about it, and it's like our arms just turn into pieces of wood. There's a great scene from the movie Talladega Nights in which Will Ferrell's character Ricky Bobby is interviewed for the first time, and all of a sudden he starts doing this. And the reporter says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I don't know what to do with my hands." And we've all felt that way at one time or another. You shouldn't feel, though, that you need to be gesturing throughout your presentation all the time in order to be effective. In fact, really, you shouldn't. If you've ever been to a play and watched the actors on stage, you'll notice that they're not just gesturing wildly all the time. Well, at least not the good ones. Instead, they choose their gestures very specifically with intent and purpose and use them somewhat sparingly. The first type of gesture that we're going to talk about is what I call directional gestures. And as the name implies, this is any time we're directing our audience's attention to something. For example, if you're in an auditorium or a conference room when we're finally able to do those things again, there's probably going to be a screen in the room with your PowerPoint on it, and you'll be pointing things out. Take a look at this chart. This image is particularly important. I want to direct your attention to the screen behind me and the video we're about to watch. You also may be pointing out an object in the room. If you're in the courtroom and you're a lawyer, it may be, "I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit A," or you're giving a sales presentation. Our latest model is what you see here on stage with me. And as you can see, we have a lot of new features to this that I want to point out. You also might be directing attention to a colleague or a co-presenter. I'd like to turn things over now to my colleague Jan, who's going to talk about what we're doing next quarter. The second category of gestures is what I call quantitative. They're gestures that reflect quantity or size. So, some examples. We're going to increase sales by 50% this year. We're going to shrink expenses. Sales were flat. It was the biggest house I'd ever seen. It was a real low point. The third type of gesture is what I call signposts, which are basically an aid or a roadmap to keep your audience engaged by knowing where you're at in your presentation and help certain points resonate with them. A really good presentation is going to be broken down into very obvious, clear, and distinct sections and make obvious, clear, and distinct points. And your gestures or your signposts are going to help audiences with that. For example, you're giving a sales presentation. There are 3 reasons why you should use our company. 1, we have a proven track record. 2, we're cost effective. And 3, we have great customer care follow-up. So let's talk about number 1 first. Our proven track record, etc., etc. Again, it's a roadmap for your audience. Now, notice that I got on them and off of them pretty quickly. You don't need to or want to have your finger sticking out there the whole time that you're talking about point 1, because pretty soon everyone's just looking at your finger and not listening to your words. So if you're going to use these kind of signposts, 1, 2, get on them and get off of them quickly. So those are 3 ideas for some types of gestures that you might want to incorporate into your next presentation. And here are a couple of bonus tips for virtual presentations. So any presentation that we might do during a Zoom meeting, or if we're part of a webinar, which is what most of us are doing these days. People ask me, should I still be incorporating gestures into my Zoom virtual presentations? And the answer is yes, as long as they fit, obviously, within the confines of the screen. So think about it as the difference between a big grandiose gesture that an actor might make on stage in a large auditorium versus a smaller, more subtle gesture that they might make if they're in a close-up in a TV show or a movie. So, for example, "It was the biggest house I'd ever seen" is kind of a wasted gesture because half of it is off the edges of the screen. Instead, "It was the biggest house I'd ever seen." You still get your point across, but your hands are within the screen limits. One other idea for virtual presentations, especially if it's going to be a longer or more formal presentation where you think you might want to be incorporating a number of gestures, is instead of sitting at your kitchen table or your desk and being very close up to the screen, like most of us do for just a typical everyday Zoom meeting, instead try standing up and backing away from your screen a little bit to give yourself a wider shot and give yourself a little bit more room to gesture than you normally would. That way you're not confined to tiny little motions that fit within your screen. So try that sometime. Get up, back away, and give yourself a little bit more room to gesture. Well, that's a wrap for today. So if you're one of the many people who doesn't feel totally comfortable doing gestures during presentations, but you want to mix things up a little bit and add some interest, try the 3 categories of gestures that we talked about today: directional, quantitative, and signposts. Join me next time where we'll take another tip or technique from the theater used by professional actors and apply it to improve our public speaking skills in the business world.